Now this is a short video. I want to try to pass on some information for getting nice crisp paint lines, nice and even. Some of the things I've learned over the years that would be worth if you're doing this kind of a paint job where there's a lot of parallel lines or straight lines, and a little bit of information on how to lay out a paint job. And we've done this many times on video, but this I wanted to concentrate just on getting the paint edges and the paint lines really crisp no matter what the design is. And over the years we've done some really complex designs that really had to be thought out well in advance, and this is one of them. This looks a lot easier than it is to lay all those lines out, and they're all even, they're all parallel, and all the tricks and tips that go into that, and what tape to use, and just some good general painting information I think you can use. So some good, really good basic information is before you put any tape down, you want the paint surface to be smooth, not orange peely, not rough, and I would always want to get that last coat of color paint on as smooth as possible. Now the tapes that I use, the fine line tape, the vinyl tape, is really good for getting a nice straight edge on a straight line. If you have curves, multiple curves, I like to use the 3M green masking tape as a better choice. If you try to transpose that and use the fine line tape, the vinyl tape to make corners and edges and circles, you find out it picks up on the inside of the diameter sometimes, and it can get real frustrating because it doesn't release real nice then. But a combination of using those two tapes and knowing where to use them and what part of the job to use them on, I would say that's basically the 101 information to share. So the first tip, if you're working like I am in cold weather or in the winter, never leave the tape on any longer than you have to, especially if you put things out in a cold garage or a cold room to dry. Get the tape off within 24 hours. Now another great tip if you're new to painting or you don't know this, tape releases if you warm it up. It's a lot less chance you'll pull up any tape or peel up and get a rough edge. The smooth edge will come. The best you can get it is if the tape is not just nice and warm to the touch. I like to use a hairdryer, never a heat gun. And I like to use this real low tack. This came from Harbor Freight. It's painter's tape, but it has almost no tack to it. So what it does, it doesn't tend to pull up paint when I backmask. They make the high quality tape that you get from Lowe's and the inexpensive tape from Harbor Freight. Both seem to work pretty good, and they're really good for backmasking. And when you have a job, the more complex a job is, and the more times you're going to backmask, pull it up, backmask, pull it up, backmask, pull it up, the more important it is to get the tape right. And never use old tape that gets a couple of years old, turns into flypaper stuff, and it always tends to pull up the paint. Now, another great tip, and this is something a lot of people, they don't really realize how critical it is to once the tape is warm, once the surface is warm and you've used a hairdryer, is to pull the tape straight back. Not to pull it straight up, pull it as straight back as possible anytime you can, and keep it warm. If you keep the surface warm and you keep the tape warm, there's going to be very little chance you'll do any damage to the paint underneath. Now, again, old tape gets stickier and stickier and stickier as time goes by. Cold makes tape stickier and stickier. The idea is to use fresh tape and keep it warm. Don't be cheap with the heat. Once it's warm like that, and get a brand new razor, catch the edge of it and pull it straight back, not on an angle. The more you can pull it straight back over itself like this, what'll happen, you'll get a much nicer, crisper edge than if you pull it up on a 45-degree angle. And if the paint is really dry, like as an example, if you let this paint dry for 3, 4, 5 days and it gets really totally dry, sometimes you don't get that nice edge. It just turns, these little powdery edges come off. But see, I'm trying to pull this straight back. Keep it warm. The main thing, keep it warm. And the more complex the paint job is, the more important it is to do this. The tape's coming straight back and very, very slow. You don't want to rip it off like when you rip a Band-Aid off and you pull all the hair off your arm. That's a good tip. And all the little tips combined, when you have a paint job this complex, it really makes it a whole lot easier. So the best tip I can offer on this video is to keep the part warm, keep it a hair dryer right at your side. That's number one. Number two is have some patience. People that try to pull a tape up too quickly, it's time consuming to do this slowly and hold a hair dryer in the other hand, but it's always worth. At the end, the edge will be more even, more crisp. And in this case, this was a pretty complex paint job, and I tried to be very, very patient, because once I finish one of these restorations, my goal is I want to have it for the rest of my life. And if I do it for somebody else, I want them to have it for the rest of their life. So spending an extra hour or a half hour here, I don't care at all. I'm very, very conscious of the fact that patience really pays big time on this. Now, it's always tempting when you get to the very end of this, and is to try to speed it up, and I do too. But I'm always aware of, if you just take your time, there's such a big dividend to be paid at the very end. Now, in the case of you want to ultimately get that last piece of the tape off, and everybody's impatient about that. I want to see the design that I came up with. I want to do it as quick as possible, but I do want those edges to be absolutely like you took a razor and put them in there, and not have little edges that are rough and uneven. And if the ultimate thing, if you were doing this, and what you could do is, once you put the tape down, I don't do this, is airbrush in a little bit of clear over the tape, let it dry for an hour or so, and then put the color in. I didn't do it on this job, but that's how we used to do the complex paint jobs on model airplanes, and it worked really, really well. That was a really good tip years ago. Now, because I've been doing this a really lot of years, I thought it'd be interesting to share some information. When we started painting model planes back in the 60s, actually, they didn't make 1/8-inch tape. We had to make our own. We'd lay it out on a piece of glass and take a metal ruler and cut 1/8-inch and 1/4-inch, and boy, was it time consuming. And we only had the masking tape that used to have a tendency to pull up the paint. Nowadays, you have the ability or the option of just buying the right tape, using the technique, and we didn't know it years and years ago in the 60s and 70s. It was very common to just pull up a big chunk of paint. That almost never happens now, because we've worked out most of the kinks, and the heat is the biggest kink of all. And the second biggest kink, don't ever, I did this one time and I will never do it again. I was going away on a trip over the weekend, and I put a gas tank with some tape on it in a garage for the weekend. Came back on Monday morning and never realized it had gone below freezing for 2 nights in a row. And when I pulled up the paint, I literally pulled up the paint. I basically had to go back to primer and sand the whole tank. But cold is not your friend when you're doing this kind of work. Now, another thing, if you rub your hand like this, and I always say, the worst thing you can do, you can feel that edge. And obviously, in very high level finishing, you don't want to feel the edge. If you close your eyes, you don't want to feel that. So one of the things a lot of people mistakenly do is get some sandpaper, some 2000 grit, and try to smooth that edge out. Well, I do it with my bare hand. That's okay. And my hands are perfectly clean from, I have that degreaser on my hands when I do this. I don't want to put oil and grease. But anyway, the other trick is you can use a credit card, and I've put that on other videos many times, and shave it back and forth with a credit card. That doesn't seem to hurt too much. But if you use sandpaper especially on when you're doing white or silver, those sanding scratches, you're basically going to have to repaint the white to get them out. There is no way I've ever found to get them out, and that is a really good tip. So another thing to consider, and I don't do it because I'm not working in a warm weather climate, but if I was in Florida or California, Arizona, I could take this outside and do it. And the radiant energy would keep the tank warmer. And again, always, that's a big thing to learn if you're new to painting. Warm is always your friend. Cold is not your friend. This was a really terrible tank. When I got this, this was one of the track bike tanks. I have two of them. And I decided this was the better of the two. It had the fewest dents, but it still had a lot of work. And I wanted to make sure before I went on to the clear and the decals and all of the final details, because John Pothier had put in so much work on the decals for this job, I wanted it to be perfect. And I really, at this point in time, it's a good idea to do it with your hands. Your eye can be tricked, but any little area that needs attention before you put the clear on, this is the time to do it. And if it slipped by you before, well, it's going to be some extra work. Now, I was real careful here. I wanted this, and I was real fussy about this because I had a vision of this paintwork. I had a model airplane that was painted in similar colors that was an award winner, and I wanted to use that. I was hoping I'd find some old pictures of it. I unfortunately don't have any pictures of it, but I had it in my mind. And this color combo, Karen really liked it, but I knew if I didn't get the striping right, if those edges were all crooked, or if there was some other trade-off on it, or if that stripe wasn't exactly down in the middle or something. And when you sit on a bike, you can see both stripes. So it had to be measured every inch of the way. It had to be perfect.